One of the big news stories connecting rugby to rugby league in the last week has been the news that Mark Nawaqanitawase's said he's coming back to rugby, whatever that means yet, because he wants to play in the Home World Cup in 2027. It immediately got headlines, it immediately got traction and engagement for rugby union. Are you trying to secure Mark's services so that he's not only coming back to the game but playing the game in Australia in the lead up to that Home World Cup in 27?
Yeah, well, I mean, firstly, look, I think his comments reflect, what we see our value proposition as being. So, I've talked a lot about coexisting with the other codes, and we've got a very firm value proposition in rugby with the international content, which is really compelling. And it was great to see someone like Mark come out and acknowledge that and recognise that. And so, our position on all of that is we need to ensure we're creating an environment in rugby that's appealing for all athletes to be a part of. And I think that if you look at the path forward and, having, seen the impact of the 25 Lions series and the power in 2 years' time of whatever a Home Rugby World Cup will have in this country, and having played in 2003 and understanding it as a player, like, it is powerful. And so, having players like Mark show interest in coming back to Australia is great to hear. And now we go through the process of ensuring that comes to life.
Is Super Rugby Pacific enticing enough for him to come back to that in order to then play for the Wallabies and play at the Home World Cup, or are you consigned to letting him go overseas to a competition where he might get some more money and try and work on him becoming a Wallaby through that avenue?
Yeah, I think everything's. We'll be pretty creative around how we establish the best possible team in 27. And look, I think Super Rugby Pacific over the last 2 years has grown materially over where it's been probably over the last 5 or 6 years prior to that. And so I think the product out in the field, I think that the contagion impact of a engaging Wallabies performance will help Super Rugby Pacific into 2026. And so I think we've got a huge amount of growth to occur in Super Rugby Pacific. But I do think as a product in preparation for international rugby, I still think it's probably the number one product for test match players to actually elevate then into the next level of international rugby. And I think we've seen that through the Rugby Championship over the last 6 weeks.
There was some commentary when he made his announcement about the publicity it gives to rugby. One particularly positive piece of publicity was Mark did a podcast with, maybe it was on ABC, with Sam Wykes, and he was asked about what he missed or what he liked about rugby. And he said he loved the freedom he gets to play in rugby, the ability to roam and that sort of stuff. Rugby can be tarred negatively with this notion that it's boring, it's too complicated. As the leader of the governing body in Australia, how pleasing was it to hear Mark talk about the freedom and the excitability of playing in rugby union?
Yeah, and I guess that is one of the value propositions. It's it's a game for all shapes and sizes, and it has been since the start of the game at rugby school back in the 1800s, and so I think that in terms of the actual value proposition for those that participate, it's hugely attractive. And when you look at the athletes such as Mark and his ability to chime in different areas of the game, having that freedom was interesting to see his reflections, having now spent some time in a different code.
Do you see it? We've spoken recently about how the G'day law, or whatever it's called, the overseas player policy is not really a factor anymore, and players can be picked from overseas. And obviously the shape of that is yet to be kind of seen. Do you see it as a perfectly valid pathway for Mark to take to go and play overseas and then come back for the Wallabies? Obviously he's going to be commanding a pretty high price tag given what he's done out here in the rugby league world, and you've only got so many pennies you can spend on your stars. In the past it might have been seen as a negative that Mark would go overseas in this instance, but do you feel like that is now going to be a more common pathway for Australian players?
Look, our preference is always going to be to have the Australian players playing in front of the Australian people in Australia, and so that's certainly our intent, and we've seen the power of cohesion when players are playing more frequently together, and then how that then transfers into the international game. So that's certainly our preference. That being said, we're also conscious, to my probably earlier point around creating a financially sustainable model through 26 to 2030, is we can only live within the means that we have to ensure that the game's set up in perpetuity. So it's a really, I guess, long way of saying, like, we'll be very creative, but we'll also be very disciplined financially around how we invest in our players.
Sorry, just one more on
you don't have to apologise to me for asking questions.
I'm interrupting you. I guess the other factor is Max Jorgensen comes off contract at the end of next year. Obviously, he's been an absolute superstar this year, fulfilling what we thought would come, right? Is there a world where you try and lock away Max Jorgensen earlier than the end of next year? It's not something that rugby does very often, is, extend people before their contract comes up. But is he that good that you would look to do that?
And just adding to that,
that's all right.
If I can, would there be a fear that there might be retribution from the Roosters in the NRL, that they've lost Mark, maybe they could get Max?
Yeah, well, I think that then comes back to the value proposition, and that's why it's really important for us to continue to lean into that value proposition and ensure that the environment that we're creating for our athletes is as compelling as possible. Players like Max, he's the face of Get Into Rugby, the program we're trying to generate in community for our youngest girls and boys playing the game. It's broader than, I guess, just the finances. It's actually a bigger picture, and it wouldn't be the first time, certainly in my tenure, where we've blended and extended contracts and extended players to a longer period of time, a long way out from the expiry of their contract. So again, very creative. Clearly Max is a generational talent in what we've seen throughout in his early stages of his Test career. Because
this is what the argument was. I know you won't talk money, but Joseph Suaali's huge contract. Hamish McKinnon used to talk about that. There's a huge marketing perspective. He's going to be the face on the post, and we're now seeing Max is actually starting to become in that territory as well. So when you talk about kind of the overall value and what you're prepared to contract them for, do you take that into account with a guy like Max? Yeah,
without doubt. But you still got to live within your means. Otherwise, we do go through that next cycle from 26 to 2030 in an unsustainable model, and we chew up all the future revenue that we get from 2027 Rugby World Cup. So, we're very conscious about being disciplined in our cost base. But seeing the elevation of profiles and personalities like Max coming through the system is really pleasing.
Just finishing on Mark, are you confident if he was to go overseas and play his club football through that avenue, he would represent the Wallabies in 27? Because he's eligible to represent Fiji and Italy as well, and very proud of his Fijian heritage.
Yeah, look, I mean, again, it's only very early in those speculative comments, but I think that playing for Australia in a home World Cup is probably one of the most special things you can do as an Australian athlete. And I've been there and I've done it, and I've spoken to others who have done it, and it's still a highlight of their lives. And I think that for any athlete that's had history in rugby that wants to experience that, they'd love to be a part of it.
This is supposed to be our short and sharp section. We've done 6 questions on the first one.
It's like a quick hand segment.
I'm either not answering the questions and you keep going deeper, or you're interested.
Okay, moving on.